Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed by the hosts do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions, including my own Grand Lodge. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, and questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or the Facebook event page for episode 223, History of the Grand Lodge of Virginia, or on the YouTube chat running alongside this video. Jason, I'm going to count on you to moderate those and get those going.
Yep.
Let's see. My name.
I'm the only other one here.
It's low. It's weird. It's really weird. We have an unwritten rule that we got to have at least 3 hosts. Robert's been in and out of the green room, getting new IT set up, new room. So he'll be back in, hopefully, later. But this is really weird, just having a dialogue instead of a conversation. So my name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, chartered under the Grand Lodge of Virginia on 11/11/2011. And with me tonight, I also have my other Virginia Mason friend, Jason Richards. Hi, Jason.
Hey, everybody. Jason Richards here, past master of Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, and member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in the District of Columbia.
Alrighty then. Given that Masonic news is light, this could be a short show, folks. I hope you have other podcasts lined up because...
well, Ex Oriente wasn't able to go on the air over the weekend, so you have to find somebody else.
We were able to go live, so therefore we're incrementally better. Moving on, let's go into tonight's topic. And I'm going to cover a lot, but a little at the same time, because what I want to do is talk about the history, or at least the part that fascinated me about the history of the Grand Lodge of Virginia, specifically about colonial Masonry and how it led up to the formation of the first, yes, that's right, I said it, the first Grand Lodge of organized and constituted by members of America in the United States of America. But as we talked about last week with Jason Van Dyke and the history of the Grand Lodge of DC, what I liked that Brother Van Dyke did was paint an illustrative history of what the times was like, where Washington, D.C. was a murky bog, for lack of a better term, with malaria and gnats and mosquitoes, and travel was limited because of all the waterways. And so what's fascinating about Masonry at that time is if you think about how did Masonry come to the colonies, right? If the colonies were formed by immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, England, and other European countries, then it would come to follow that Masonry, some of those men had brought Masonry with them into the colonies. And then when you travel all that way, the first thing that I would do is, hey, I'm gonna go find some other brothers to go hang out with and maybe do some Masonry. And so when you do the research about colonial Masonry, you find that this thing that we have today about recognition and regularity and rules and providence, that was just not even a thing back then. It was very cavalier in how you recognized other brothers. In fact, if you were happy to find another brother because you're like, hey, cool, let's talk Masonry stuff, and you really didn't care about which Grand Lodge you came from and all that. And so what most people don't know is that lodges were formed sometimes by whim, and sometimes by even other lodges chartering other lodges. So I want to go through a little bit of the hot mess that was 18th century Masonry. In the early 18th century, there were several ways in which a Masonic lodge might be formed, might come into existence. First, several Freemasons might just show up and work together to create a self-regulating lodge. And we're just going to say it's a matter of time immemorial. We have the right to proceed to work, and we'll just do our own thing. and that was just accepted as a thing to do. And you'll hear about how some of the lodges that formed the Grand Lodge of Virginia may have had those similar kind of origins. Also, number two, a Grand Lodge, viewing the applicants to be within its jurisdiction, might grant them a dispensation, warrant, or charter to work. And so that means that if if you're from the Grand Lodge of Scotland, you might just say, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and charter a lodge out there somewhere, or Grand Lodge of Ireland. We'll just go ahead and charter them there. Territories were still kind of being established, and by the way, because Masonry had not been established, it was kind of up for the grabs. It was up for the taking. So basically, if it was first come first serve, whoever could charter a lodge over there, hey, now I've got territory over there, which becomes a problem later on when you have neighboring lodges that not only have different ritual, right, different customs, but they're even founded by completely different grand lodges. Next up, a provincial grand master or his deputy might create lodges within his jurisdiction. That means someone could be a territorial grand master, usually from England, that says, you are now in charge of the Americas, and now go ahead and you can charter lodges on behalf of the Grand Lodge of England. Number four, a Masonic lodge in another state or jurisdiction could be chartering lodges in a different state. And you'll find that to be true in Virginia as well. Number five, a Masonic lodge in Virginia might create another lodge in Virginia just because they say so. And then last but not least, the last way in which a Masonic lodge might come into existence is that a military lodge or traveling lodge might create a lodge as it passes through an area because, hey, we're Masons. You want to be a Mason? Sure. And then they just go ahead and stand up a lodge, form a lodge, charter a lodge, and or do degree work to confer on these people that they just met. So you can see there was no order, no sense of regularity as it was going through this. But what we'll find out is that the short answer is that we really don't know how most of the lodges, how long most of the lodges that have since formed the Grand Lodge of Virginia have even been in existence, nevertheless, where they were chartered from. And at the time, that was okay. It seems weird to us now in hindsight that we don't even know where the regularity of these lodges or where they came from. But the fact that we then healed them later on, and some of them just flat out healed them by order of saying, hey, you know what? We're the Grand Lodge now. Congratulations. You're in our state territory. We own you. Welcome aboard.
John, that's a really interesting point. Is my audio okay? Sorry if I'm...
Sound great.
So the your comment about like how long they were in existence is really interesting. The only other time I've come across that actually is Henry Coyle when he's referencing the Tun Tavern Lodge. He calls it an immemorial rights lodge, having existed from a time before the Grand Lodge. And I almost wonder if that same kind of thing is applicable to some of those lodges that formed, Grand Lodge of Virginia.
Absolutely. And as we're about to see, as Jason covered in his history of Scottish Freemasonry, some of these were or claiming that they had kind of, I don't know what you call it, just supreme authority because, you know what, we're even older than our Grand Lodge, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, like kill winning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Kilwinning chartered one or two, possibly, of Virginia lodges before Virginia.
Get out of town. That's awesome.
Because why not? What are they going to do?
Well, it made sense from the standpoint that America was at this point still part of the colonies, and you had English, Irish, and Scottish military lodges popping up all over the place.
Bingo. So we know around that time frame that most of these lodges had been chartered by Grand Lodges of Scotland, England, and Ireland. Now, if you go back and look in the Grand Lodge of Ireland's books, you'll never find any lodges chartered from the Grand Lodge of Ireland into the United States, but that became, at least in Virginia, the folk, the mythos of, oh, well, we were an Irish lodge. Well, back then they kind of lumped the Scots and the Irish together. They called them Scotch Irish, and there really wasn't much of a difference to them by then. But basically, if you hear in Virginia that it was an Irish lodge, it was really a Scottish lodge. Also, I had one quote from one of my sources that said that basically there were so many Scottish chartered lodges in Virginia before the Grand Lodge of Virginia formed that it had the most Scottish concentration than pretty much most of the entire East Coast, per capita. So you can see that at this point there's now a strong Scottish influence. However, when we look through the history of all these different lodges, I'm not going to go through the dirty history of these, but what I want to take care of is that there were 9 lodges. There was at least 12 that were asked to contribute to the formation of the Grand Lodge of Virginia. 9 of them participated, 3 kind of stayed back, and then there were other lodges that just, we don't know where they came from, where they were. We don't have a lot of documentary evidence. Why don't we have documentary evidence? Because a lot of records were lost in fires, burned. They weren't kept very well, or they were just under cover of secrecy, right? And so they took secrecy a little bit more. Even the minutes, right? We can't even tell we exist. But we think that the oldest Virginia Masonic Lodge was around Norfolk Lodge at Norfolk, Virginia, near a waterway, because that was really where an influx of colonists came in. And even though we have some scattered evidence that it was around since 1733, we know that it at least got its charter on June 1st, 1741. Other lodges that I'm going to list here, of the other 8, I'm going to list what Grand Lodge they came under and when they were chartered. So number 2, Port Royal in Caroline County, was chartered by Scotland December 1st, 1755. Number 3, Blandford Lodge at Petersburg, was chartered by, guess who, Scotland, September 9th, 1757. Fredericksburg Lodge of George Washington fame at Fredericksburg, Virginia. We've talked a little bit about this in some of our, secrets you didn't know, or everything you knew about Freemasonry is wrong. We know it's had been working since 1751, but it was completely irregular and clandestine, because why? It's Scottish. It just did whatever it wanted to. Remember, chartered in 1751, use that with air quotes, raised George Washington, Master Mason, on August 4th, 1753, but didn't even get their formal charter from Scotland until July 21st, 1758. So you can see it was a Scottish lodge doing its own thing, but established just in time for the Grand Lodge of Virginia to be formed.
What actually stops the other lodges that you previously mentioned from also being Scottish lodges that just did their own thing also? Like what's the differentiating factor?
Basically, it was when Scotland gave them a charter, and that's really what happened.
Like the official piece of paper.
Right. I mean, and Jason could elaborate a little bit more, but the Scottish Grand Lodge was pretty much hands off. You want to elaborate on that, Jason?
Sure. So, at the formation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736, Scotland again was very heavily operative in nature. So, at the foundation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, only about 20%, less than 20% of the lodges in Scotland actually came and supported the formation of the Grand Lodge. And the folks who were pushing for the formation of the Grand Lodge were of course focusing on speculative masonry. Of course, by this point, in Masonry's history. The third degree was getting some traction, and of course, operative Masons didn't like the third degree because the third degree made them all out to be murderers. So, in an attempt to appease the operative Masonic guilds in Scotland, the Grand Lodge of Scotland said, okay, I tell you what, you can keep your ritual, you can keep your regalia, you can keep your traditions. Um, we just want to have kind of administrative oversight, which is why if you visit 10 different lodges in Scotland, you're going to get 10 wildly different experiences when it comes to ritual, regalia, and practices. And this is, a tradition, of course, the Grand Lodge being very, very much hands off on the uh, goings ons of its constituent lodges has persisted through today, and that's a great reason for why it was even more hands off with lodges overseas.
Yeah, wow.
Because
It's so far away.
yeah,
Don't worry about it. Let's see, number 5, Saint Tammany at Hampton, formed by Scotland, 1757. Williamsburg at Williamsburg was we know was operating in 1751, but officially got a new charter from England in 1773. So I'm going to assume they were chartered by England in 1751, but lost their charter for some reason. Bodator Lodge at Gloucester Courthouse got their charter from Fredericksburg Lodge, the clandestine lodge in 1757, a year before the Fredericksburg got their formal charter from Scotland. So this is a lodge to lodge chartering. Number 8, Cabin Point in Prince George's County. This is cool. Got its charter from the Provincial Grand Master of and for America by the Deputy Provincial Grand Master of and for America. Yeah. So there
Who's the guy? I gotta know who that guy is.
I didn't write it down. I'll get the answer later on.
Barva.
But
Joe Schmuckatelli.
Yes, if anyone
I
asks,
mean,
it's Schmuckatelli.
that is like the closest thing I've ever seen or heard, rather, to the idea of a grand master in a state ever, or for the United States. So
Of and for America. Yeah.
wow.
And which comes up as a problem later for them because, basically the Grand Lodge of Virginia, once they get formed and everything, say, hey, everybody is part who's been chartered by other Grand Lodges is ours, including this weird one over here that was done by the Provincial Grand Master of and for America.
I'm about to make my second Super Troopers reference. That little guy over there, I wouldn't worry about that little guy over there.
Number 9, Yorktown was founded by England, but the moderns on August 1st, 1755. There were 3 other lodges that did not participate in any of the upcoming to be announced conventions. There was Tappahannock, Hobbs Hole at Tappahannock, which was chartered by Mother Kilwinning Lodge, number 0, which was got their charter June 3rd, 1758. Again, that was another Scottish, we can do whatever we want, charter from one Scottish lodge to this lodge. Winchester Hiram at Winchester got their charter. Here's another fun fact. By the ancient Provincial Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania. So we have ancient Pennsylvania chartering a lodge down in Virginia on October 4th, 1768. And then finally, Falmouth Kilwinning at Falmouth, guess where? Scotland, April 12th, 1754. So that in conclusion, these were all the different lodges that were going on about the state. And so we have Scotland, we have Kilwinning Lodge, chartering lodges. We have Fredericksburg Lodge chartering itself and then chartering other lodges. We have the moderns, the ancients, Scotland, no Ireland, although it depends if they're Scotch-Irish. There's so much confusion going on. It's amazing that we ever got this thing together. So this was what was going on leading up to the late 1700s.
Quick question, if I could. So you mentioned that one of the lodges was Pennsylvania. Perhaps this is something you'll get to later, and if so, just tell me. But is there any remnant of Pennsylvania ritual in somewhere like provincially allowed by the Grand Lodge that's Pennsylvania ritual or anything?
We squished that bug pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
We
certain.
eradicated Pennsylvania ritual like the plague that it is.
Well, because it's so clandy.
We're not having that here.
Just kidding, PA. I love you guys.
However, fun fact: Winchester Hiram Lodge does raise a future president to Master Mason at a traveling lodge, which would turn out to be William McKinley was raised there. That's just much later on in Virginia's history. Okay, so we got all these different lodges who have all sorts of different parents, right? Different grand chartering given to them. So they're doing their own thing. But what else is going on in the late 1700s? That's right. It's the American Revolution. That's been going on from the mid 1700s through the 1780s, 1790s. So really, you could say that you could depend on where you draw the line, but just say by October 19th, 1781 was when the British general Charles Cornwallis surrendered his troops in Yorktown, Virginia to George Washington. And that's an important fact because that means George Washington is doing work in the Revolution during the same time that we talked about him being raised in 1753, and then he's going out and about. So anyway, in 1777, Williamsburg Lodge, which happens to end up being the hub of all this Masonic activity, suggests to the officers that of all these different lodges, that a representative, an officer, or their deputies meet in Williamsburg, convenient for them, so that they have the purpose of choosing their own Grand Master for the state of Virginia. Not everyone showed up. In fact, only delegates from Norfolk, Port Royal, Blandford, and Cabin Point met in Williamsburg. So that's 5 lodges on May 6th, 1777. This is right after, the Declaration of Independence was signed. So we're
like 3 years after, but yeah,
close enough. 1777. And they said, "Look, we're all
1 year after. Math is hard.
Math is hard. I get it." So everyone's got this revolutionary spirit, but the war is still going on. So the Declaration of Independence was declared, but yet we're still having all of these skirmishes going on. So what happens is by this time they said, you know what, we need to have a couple more conventions so that we can form our own, choose our own Grand Master to preside over the craft in Virginia. A committee was appointed to prepare a statement giving the reasons for such action. This committee reported on May 13th, less than a week later, 1777, and they observed the fact that all of these other lodges have different parents, right? They were formed by Grand Masters of England, Scotland, Ireland, Pennsylvania, and America, at least secondhand America. And so little benefit could be derived from a Grand Master appointed by a foreign authority. And that recourse to a Grand Lodge beyond the sea was almost impossible, and therefore a Grand Lodge at home was a matter of necessity. Now think about what's going on at this time. We had just declared independence. We said we are democratic people. We need to form our own representative government. So it's only logical now that we have our own democratic representative masonry. Okay. And so that's was led to about 18 months of conventions back and forth. Why? It takes a long time to ride horseback back and forth and get lodge representatives to these things. So the contents of that report saying we need to have our own Grand Master, not report to anyone else. By the way, you've got to politely tell your home Grand Master that you're leaving them. They said we're going to have a convention to be held in Williamsburg on June 23rd, 1777, for the purpose of electing a Grand Master. So that went out around the states, and again, not everyone participated, but either way, they had to give us a time to allow for travel. So it was further recommended, in addition to choosing a Mason within their state, that His Excellency General George Washington was a proper person to fill the office of Grand Master. However, if individual lodges should prefer some other person, they were to notify the Williamsburg Lodge, and if no selections had been made by June 1st, 1778, a convention to be called by the Master of Williamsburg Lodge should then proceed to elect a Grand Master. But that didn't happen by June 1st, 1778. The convention that actually was called was the 13th day of October, 1778. So back and forth from May 1777 all the way through early or mid-October 1778. We had all these different back and forth conventions. There were lots of conventions. Lots of delegates were sent. But after its organization, the convention proceeded to the election of a Grand Master by the name of John Blair. He was the third choice. He was number 3, right? Because George Washington of Fredericksburg Lodge, number 4, declined because he was a little busy with this thing called the Revolutionary War. Also, number 2 was a Right Worshipful Warner Lewis of Bodetort Lodge, number 7 in Gloucester County. But he declined for reasons that were not made clear in the official records. However, it's speculated that his health may not have been good, or he may have had ideological reasons for declining the honor. So then, therefore, third choice, Right Worshipful John Blair Jr., past master of Williamsburg Lodge. Again, it keeps coming up because Williamsburg Lodge did do a lot of, they were basically the seed of Freemasonry at that time. Lots of current and future Grand Line officers came out of Williamsburg Lodge. So even though if you look at the state of Virginia, Williamsburg is all the way down in the lower right, but it really became the political hub of not only the Revolution but also of Masonry. Let's see what else. So, Right Worshipful John Blair Jr. was elected or suggested to be the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Virginia, and he was pleased to accept the office. Then that by the end of that convention, they left as a Grand Lodge. That's kind of neat. You go in as a convention, you come out as a Grand Lodge. Then they said, well, we have to schedule a time to do the installation. And so we wanted to make sure that, well, everyone who didn't show up gets a chance to attend. Therefore, the installation of Grand Lodge officers occurred about 2 weeks later on October 30th, 1778, at which time there was a great attendance of the brethren from several subordinate lodges. And at the time,
Ooh,
several, quite a few. And then after his installation, Most Worshipful Brother Blair appointed a whole bunch of his subordinate grand officers. He basically could just wave his wand and say, all these guys are now my grand officers. They were not elected. Let's see. What was interesting, though, is that all of the other lodges, except for Falmouth Lodge, subsequently yielded to the authority and jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Virginia. The Falmouth Lodge became dormant and ceased to exist shortly after the formation of the Grand Lodge. We think it's likely that they either transferred or their members left to across the river to go to other lodges, or just that they folded. We're not really sure why they didn't just come on board. But remember, Falmouth Lodge, like most of the lodges, had an even stronger loyalist Scottish influence, right? They had a lot of Scottish connections and were influenced by loyalist political sentiments. So it didn't feel right for them. And they could have just been very weak. And again, just to reiterate a point, it is noteworthy that the independent Grand Lodge of Virginia was established in the midst of the War for American Independence, and thus was a product of the spirit of the times. Now, there's an interesting quote that came up during one of the conventions in May 13th, 1777. And I quote, we find on record that the Grand Lodges of England, Scotland, and Ireland founded their original right of election upon their sole authority, by mutual consent, distinct and separate from all foreign power wherever. We, therefore, conclude that we have and ought to hold the same rights and privileges that Masons in all time heretofore have confessedly enjoyed. It was also said it's the opinion of this convention that all regular chartered lodges within Virginia should be subject to the Grand Master of this state, which is interesting because the statement of sovereignty, that we get to pick our own elected leadership, has the same ring to it as the famous Lee resolution that was offered in the Continental Congress by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia 1 year earlier, in June 7th, 1776. Right, that is the resolution that ended up becoming the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. That we have our own power. So again, you can see the political influence that it had for we have to represent ourselves just like we were representing ourselves in our nation. So I think that's kind of neat. And that's where I want to stop, because it really gets up to how we came from this amorphous, system of lots of different influences to kind of come to agree. And I think it was driven by the political ideologies that were going on in the formation of this country, and the timing was right. And of course, great. George Washington never, despite what the mythos, George Washington was never Grand Master of Masons in Virginia, but he did eventually become master of his lodge the same time he was president. So I'll stop there. A couple other little fun facts along the way. The capital of Virginia moved from Williamsburg into Richmond a couple years later, and then the Grand Lodge needed a new building, and they also chartered their first lodge, which is the Richmond, now known as Richmond Randolph Lodge, Randolph after our third Grandmaster. And that lodge is still operating today, and it is the nation's oldest continuously operating Masonic lodge that's still working today. So I think that's kind of neat.
And their building is practically falling down.
It's older than you, Jason. So
there are a lot of buildings that are older than I am.
So yeah, it's something that's kind of neat that we still have that today, and it might also be haunted. So that's another little thing. I think I'll end there, but because I wanted to cover kind of the history of how we got there, and I think it's fascinating that we were able to pull this whole system off, given all the different influences. There's at least 5 Grand Lodges that influenced the foundation of Masonry in Virginia, and we were able to pull it off and have our own uniform system. And another fun fact that I learned, this is just a little sidebar, that attendance at the Grand Lodge from Grand Lodge officers was horrible for like the first 50 years. They just didn't show up.
When you say horrible, what are we talking about? Nobody, or just
less than half just decided to show up to their grand annual communication?
I mean, that kind of sounds like
that's why they made it mandatory.
That sounds like today's regular Freemason who decides to just not have to go to the stated.
Yep.
That's cool. Somebody else will do all the work.
Good stuff.
Have you ever been to a Grand Lodge meeting? I mean, makes sense.
Dude, Illinois is huge. We have between, I think my first year there we had about 1,300.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second year was a little less. But guys are joining and they like to go down, so it's a good time.
There you go. Any questions for me based off of what you've heard so far? No.
I asked my questions during your presentation, so that I really should have some more questions for you, though. I'll probably post them inside the TMR Facebook chat. Maybe maybe you can answer them there.
So there's one question that we got on the YouTube chat that I think is a little outside of the scope for this episode, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In your research into this, John, did you come across any records of British and colonial Masons attending lodge together during the Revolutionary War period?
I'm trying to think.
Don't hurt yourself.
I know. I want to say yes, but I don't have a specific case off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm gonna hold off on giving wrong information, but I'm inclined to say it absolutely occurred, especially again given the fact that there was no sense of regularity at that time. So if you were just near a lodge, that's what you did, right? You didn't really care what side you're on. You're just like, I just want to hang out with some brothers, and so that was typical at that time.
What an odd thing, though. I mean, when we think about regularity today, so many guys have, they have a freak out, and rightfully so, in terms of the way we manage the craft today. We have this whole thing predicated on the idea of regularity. It's the ASC certified mechanic of masonry. If you don't have that certificate, you're not for real. And I'll not say what I think about that, but I will say that what I do find really interesting is that the way that existed then is very much the way some of our, whether they want to admit it or not, very much the same way a lot of our brothers who are in foreign countries are operating when they're um, serving the military. There are certain Grand Lodges that do not recognize Grand Lodges like the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. Um, or this was in the past. Illinois was one of those states. Illinois now recognizes Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, but like they would go visit anyway because I just want to hang out with my brothers. Is this idea, um, and I gotta wonder why like we don't operate that way totally anymore. I mean, I guess that's that whole order out of chaos. Make sure we're not uh, having a pyramid scheme dues LLC.
I blame the Baltimore Convention.
The Baltimore Convention is pretty goofy. I mean, if you're going to put guys in lodges across the United States and try to supplant the system, and they're all like secret agents, and it's like Masonic espionage. Yeah, yeah, I could
We
see
did
why
one
we
episode,
might.
didn't we? I'm pretty sure we did one of the Baltimore Convention.
We did do an episode on the Baltimore Convention. Yeah. Shout out to Chris Tilley. Brother Chris Tilley gave me a sweet book on the Baltimore Convention.
Nice. Okay. If there's any other questions, we'll go to wrap things up. Okay. Robert, shameless plugs, final thoughts. What say you?
Shameless plugs. If you like podcasts, whence came you? 9:30 Sunday nights. There'll be a short episode this week. I'm heading out of town on Thursday, so I won't get to do a whole lot of recording. So we're gonna pop out a quick episode for this week. Sorry about the short one. We've got some great stuff coming up on Midnight Freemasons tomorrow morning. Greg Knott's got a great piece going up, continuing his recent series. And it's business time. It's a really cool book. Keep on top of that. We have an Audible version coming very soon. It's been submitted, and we're just tightening up a few of the loose ends with that before it comes out. So, really stoked on that. And that's all I got. I just want to say thanks. I've missed you guys. I haven't been on in a couple weeks. As you can see, I remodeled my office a lot bit. Um, but that's not why I was on. Last week I couldn't come on. My brother passed away last Sunday. Excuse me. And so we had to kind of go through the motions with that. And yep, so we're back. We're moving forward. And just thanks. A lot of guys reached out to say, how, their thoughts were with me and all that. And I appreciate the thoughts. So thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Jason.
All right, John. Thanks so much for all the research you did on the show on this topic. It's always interesting. I love history, and I'm enjoying this episode series quite a bit. So always interesting to see how we succeed in spite of ourselves, and it seems to have been the case with the formation of the Grand Lodge of Virginia. So it's always an interesting story to tell, and I love that we can get together and learn something interesting about different jurisdiction each show. So come back next week. We're gonna hear about a different Grand Lodge's history. It'll be a lot of fun.
Mhm. That's right. I think I was just checking the calendar. I think we have the Grand Lodge of Florida next. So I wonder who's going to be giving that one. That would be Mr. Senor Juan Sepulveda. And he was unable to join us tonight. He had daddy duty, but we'll see him and his research next week. I did have one other graphic for the YouTube folks. This is our first Grandmaster, John Blair. He was he was he was better better at masonry than he was at
Wait a minute. No way.
catching the ladies, I guess.
That guy. That's-
He's John's not joking. That is
That guy
Brother
looks
John
like
Blair.
the first. That guy looks like the first the first phallus meme ever.
Oh, jeez. So anyway, there he is. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Can't wait to hear from the other hosts on theirs. Check out the book. It's Business Time: Adapting a Corporate Path to Freemasonry. All over places you can buy books. And thank you very much for watching. Keep searching for more light. Have a good night.